Hello. It's so good to be here. And I'm absolutely delighted, Christy. I've been looking forward to this discussion today. I feel like we're going to shine the light on something really important for people. So I'm just appreciate everybody being here with us or watching this later.
Yeah, so glad you're here. And so, Chris, did I forget to we're live on Facebook and I'm also recording this. Have we not been live with our Zoom people and recording for that whole introduction?
I just realized it right
Oh
before I
no.
started talking. Sorry.
I'm so sorry. So we're going to have to figure out a way to do this. So I don't know if I'll go back and record a new introduction.
That's okay. We roll with it here. We roll with
it. Well, okay. Zoom just let me in. Okay. So here's what I'm going to do. If you're on Facebook Live, you're getting double duty. Sorry. But I'm going to do it really quick. For those of you just joining us live on Zoom or watching this recording, welcome to this Thrive Today webinar, which is Unlock Your Healing, the Hidden Gem of Quieting. And so I started on Facebook Live and I forgot to record on Zoom. And so this is part 2 of a series that we're doing on unlocking your healing. And we're talking about how relational skills can play a key role in getting us unstuck in our journeys of healing. And so my name is Christy Harang, and I am going to be your host for our time together. And we took a look at our first webinar on this series on skill 0 and skill 1. We talked about how those skills can help unlock things for us in our journey. And today we're focusing on skill 2 with our president and co-founder, Chris Coursey. And so he already said hello, I believe, but Chris, hello again. Thank you for being here and rolling with my technical error.
No worries. No worries. We like to demonstrate our recovery skills at Thrive Today.
Exactly.
So lots of good opportunities, but I'm excited about our time today. I'm just really looking forward to where we're going.
Yeah, absolutely. And hey, it's good to mix it up, right? We don't want every webinar to be the same. So this makes this one unique.
Right.
All right, cool. All right. So Chris, in the introduction that will be on Facebook Live, but not here, I talked a little bit about in the introduction, and I guess I'll recap it, that we're passionate about teaching people about relational skills for a lot of reasons, but one of them is that relational skills are just such a key foundation to being able to process pain in life so that we can actually heal and move forward. So I just want to invite you to share anything you would add on to that about why relational skills are so key to healing. And maybe if you have an example that would help us with that.
Yeah, I'm actually very thankful that relational skills are starting to get out there. When I started out in ministry 25 years ago, working with people who had kind of survived some severe trauma, basically really hard stuff, there wasn't a language for relational skills. In fact, the science was just coming out, and it would take a long time for that to get disseminated into the world. So we knew that in relationships, good things happened, good things would grow, but we had no idea what relational skills were. And we didn't have the language, much less like the steps and the sequence for how do we learn these skills. So inevitably what happened was people would work really hard on their healing, and for whatever reasons, they couldn't sustain their gains, or they would get so far and they'd feel like they stalled out and they weren't quite sure why. So now we have a language, thanks to the work of Dr. Jim Wilder and the Life Model, and just this amazing collaborative team. We have resources now, we have steps, we have a language for people. And I had the chance to walk alongside of a young woman who had basically been in the healing process most of her life. That's really was front and center in her mind. She had a pretty abusive childhood. And so she was working with a church. They had a team around her. She was getting prayer ministry. She was getting deliverance. She was participating in groups. She was going to conferences. She was buying books, you name it. And she was probably doing it, just trying to get a hold of her healing and to be able to hold on to that healing. but she didn't realize some key relational skills were missing. And so it was about the time that I started working with Jim Wilder and started to create resources with Jim. And so one of the things I did was help her learn some relational skills. And one of the skills, one of her biggest deficits was the skill that we're going to talk about today, Christy, which is the quieting skill. So she didn't have the quieting skill. So she was just this in constant motion, and she was overwhelmed. She was overwhelming everybody she was interacting with. And no one really had the language to help her identify, I think this is missing. And I can remember the day when I introduced this idea that I think you're missing some key relational skills, and let's work on that. And you could just see the light bulb go on in her mind and the joy on her face when she started to recognize that there's a language for this hidden iceberg that she keeps crashing into, but there's something she can do about it. And that became a turning point in her life. Like, her world changed, her relationships changed, because she started to get her footing, and she started to be able to sustain the gains that she was working on and gaining in her healing process. So night and day difference. And that's just one of many stories that we've seen over the years at Thrive Today. There's a lot here, and I'm excited that we're going to talk about it.
Yeah, no, that's so cool to hear about that. And, I'm wondering, Chris, if you can paint the picture for us of what it might look like, someone like this woman. There's other people. I'm going to share an example of my son in a minute, but what it might look like when someone has so many tools available, but they're missing this quieting piece.
Yeah. So when that quieting piece is missing, often you have someone with a lot of motivation and a lot of knowledge and a lot of understanding and a lot of passion to be able to heal and grow in the ways that they want to. But what tends to happen is you have the absence of quieting actually means there's going to be the presence of fear. And you're going to have someone, if they can't quiet, that the fear centers in the brain are going to be running the show. And so just like my friend who just kept pursuing and doing and trying and praying and just grabbing and trying to hold on to her healing, there was a lot of energy there, but she didn't have the skill to just pause, to be able to quiet and catch her breath. So what that means is it's a vicious cycle of burning myself out, which can lead to depression, anxiety, all kinds of stuff, but not quite knowing how to press the stop button or the pause button. So they keep climbing the mountains. They keep seeking and trying and working and spending. And they're just working themselves often into a frenzy. So fear's running the show. And all too often when quieting is missing, we end up just kind of burning out at some level. So physically, our body has an opinion about it, our immune system, our emotionally, mentally, whatever that may be. So they can have glorious healing sessions and then walk away and not be able to hold on to those gains, because part of the thing that's happening is they're not quieting, they're not resting. And when we're not recharging the battery, we're just kind of driving our engine into the red, so to speak, and not having any idea that what I need is some quieting and some resting and some calming. Because all too often, even when I introduce this to people who are kind of in that place, they look at me like, but quieting is like doing nothing. Like, why would I need this? I've got work to do. Right?
Yeah.
There's stuff to do here. And yeah, they're just working themselves into a frenzy and they're exhausted, and it's just not fun for them. It's not fun for their families. But Christy, I know you've got a great example. Why don't you share what you'd like to share about this?
Yeah. So with one of our kiddos, he just has had a lot of struggles through his life. And one of his struggles was really not being able to manage emotions well. And so for years, he would just have meltdowns, completely lose it. His relational circuits would go completely off, although we didn't know that term at the time. And we just wanted to help this kiddo be more stable. And we were pastors, we were praying for him, we were getting advice, reading books, counseling, doing different therapies even, but just kind of bumping up against a wall and not really seeing the help that he needed. And so thankful, because I remember the moment when the coin dropped. We were learning about relational skills and all these things, and we realized quieting was central to what he needed. And so when we started actually focusing on that piece for him, in the way we parented and helping him to quiet, we began to see things shift for him. It was like you said, just a huge turning point. And it didn't fix everything, but it enabled, just unlocked things so that he could start moving forward. So it's just been an incredibly helpful piece for us. And Chris, I'm curious, because I know in my son's case, I mean, the fear, I mean, he was constantly in fight or flight. There was a lot of fear going on. So it was pretty big and like, wah! But I know some people are stuck in fear, or struggle with quieting, and it may, their fear responses might be a little more subtle. So are there some ways that it might look that are more subtle and less like out there in your face expressive?
Yes, that's a great question. So there are some examples where some of us just in our anxiety, because we're not disconnecting, we keep amping it up. And we amp it up. I know my wife, Jen, likes to share her quieting testimony of how in college she would grade calculus papers while watching movies, while interacting with friends. Like that was her idea of resting. So for some of us, we amp it up. We keep trying to do more. For others, we conceal it a little more. We're more of the low energy people. So what we do is we're just on our phone a lot. You know, our phone is our go-to quieting resource, or we just veg out in front of the television, or we find that we can't be still. I had a friend who was just starting to work on his quieting, and one of the things that would happen with him is he couldn't sleep. And I would say, well, why can't you, why can't you sleep? How do you not sleep? What's going on there? And he said, well, when I try to stop, that's when the noise gets louder. And that's how it feels for a lot of us. If we're not like pushing, driving, we're over here where we're just doing things or focusing on things or activities. That's just what we've learned to do to disconnect, but it's not actually restorative. So the difference here is real quieting and rest is what you shared, Christy, with your son. Like that's the part that's restorative. So I'm able to be still. I'm able to be in my body. And be able to quiet. When we don't know how to quiet, it's hard to be in our body because our body screams that rest is needed, but we don't like how we feel, just like my friend who couldn't sleep because he didn't like the noise. So the absence of quiet will show up in a lot of different ways, but it still gets us all to the same point, which is we become very crispy and we can't hold on to the good stuff. And we feel like we're forcing it. And we even develop these tendencies and activities to try to avoid or try to compensate. And I like to tell people that rest starts out, if you think about an infant, rest is relational. Like babies are born with the need for food, and food leads to rest and quieting, right? With mom. And so rest is woven throughout everything in a baby's life. And baby learns to rest because there's others around who know what to do when it's time for rest. But when things can go wrong, and they do go wrong sometimes in this process, my brain will have an aversion to rest. And just like my friend, I don't like how I feel when I try. And that's just so hard, Christy. And yeah. I've been there. I know how it feels for other people just because I've been there, and I know how miserable life can be when we don't know how to quiet. It is exhausting.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're touching on something we're going to dive into in a few minutes, a little bit deeper. You bring up a couple really good points that we're going to get into. But can you talk to us about the role that quieting plays in healing, and why quieting is actually so important?
You know what? Quieting is also just woven in the process of healing. Because one of the things that happens with when I quiet is it grows my capacity. So when I'm not quieting, I'm never recharging that battery And it's the act of quieting and being able to rest, being able to calm, that actually grows my emotional capacity. It grows my bandwidth so that I can better not only live in my body, but better manage what I feel. So quieting is actually supposed to be restorative.
Mhm.
And if that is not in the healing process, then what happens is I'm actually slowly draining my battery. Even though I'm having good healing experiences and good things are happening, if I can't rest and I can't quiet, I'm not going to quite see the colorful panorama of the byproduct of healing if I can't quiet and I can't be still. So one of the ways we know, one way we know trauma's been processed is that I can be still when the memory's loaded. So there's actually peace in some of those places. That still might not be a fun memory to think about, but if it's been processed, I can have some peace there. If it's not processed, then every time that memory is loaded, I lose my peace and it just feels like I'm being hurt or traumatized all over again. So actually the byproduct of processing pain is that there should be the presence of peace. Even in those hard, painful places, there should be an infusion of peace that's part of that story. So yeah, I tell people quieting is actually one of the most productive, fruitful things you can possibly do in your healing process. And a lot of us just think, oh, quieting is doing nothing. Why would I want to do nothing?
Right.
I mean, that's appealing if you're sitting on a beach and you just, want to do nothing. But quieting is no matter where I am or who I'm with, I can be still. I can be still with my people. I can be still and just enjoy God's peace. And I'm learning to better manage what I feel. If I can't manage what I feel, the peace is going to be missing right there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's really helpful. And I think about a couple of thoughts come to my mind when you talk about, I think you use the word recovery or something like that. But I think of like an exercise circuit, a training circuit that someone goes through. Recovery is a really key part of that. That if you're lifting weights or you're doing an exercise intensely, that you've got to have that recover time, because if your muscles get over fatigued, the circuit that you're doing isn't actually going to be very successful in helping you develop strength and all that kind of stuff.
That's exactly right.
So that can be helpful for a way to think about why we need this recovery, this rest. And I also think about the scripture, be still and know that I am God. And I was thinking about, Chris, is even the ability to quiet, it's kind of a prerequisite to tune into even God's presence. If we want to know he's there with us, we actually need to still and quiet first to even be aware of his presence or other things in our life.
Yeah, I love that point, Christy. It makes me think that, when Moses stumbled upon the burning bush, like something happened where he turned and he noticed, So when we're quieting, we're pausing and noticing, what is God doing here as it relates to me? What is God up to? What would Jesus like me to know today? So actually it is the quieting that helps us better perceive God's presence, God's peace. As you said earlier, it helps us get relational. That's a very important piece, but also helps us just be able to pause and notice, what is Jesus doing here? And when I work with people, I'll ask them that. And it takes a moment for them to pause and notice, because it's like, oh, you mean Jesus is here? And I'll say, well, let's just take a breather. Let's pause and notice. And that's where the gold is, that we realize, oh, wow, Jesus is with me here. Or maybe I'm having some thoughts that I feel like he's inspiring me with. So yeah, that quieting, we just cannot overemphasize how important what is a very simple skill at face value here. It's just a very simple skill, but yet the ramifications of having this skill, especially for the healing context, is just transformational.
Awesome. So can you mention with Jen and her grading papers and watching TV or whatever is her pseudo quieting. We have a lot of ways we pseudo quiet our phones, things like that. Can you give some examples of productive quieting that would actually lead to rest and calming for people?
Yeah, so this is a really good question as well. Like, what would it look like if I can quiet? And for some of us, the key is being able to shift gears so that we can access the low energy rest. Because, we often talk about, Christy, in a lot of our teachings, like joy is the high energy, glad to be togetherness. Your heart rate speeds up and you're just kind of motivated and driven to build joy and connect with people. So with rest, the skill of resting is the on-demand release of serotonin. So your parasympathetic nervous system, which is just like the brakes for your nervous system, your autonomic nervous system, it lets you take that breath when you need it. And so for some of us, a hot bath helps to be able to quiet our body so that we can then quiet our mind, and access that low energy rest. Some people just like to play music that's very calming or soothing. We do different exercises at our Thrive trainings and we play different kinds of music. And let's face it, there's some music that makes it really hard to quiet. It's just so unhelpful. But there's other kinds of music that's very calming. And so some people, it's that hot bath, it's calming. For some people, it's practicing appreciation or gratitude. So they think about the good things and then they can better be able to feel some peace. And so quieting is actually, because as I said earlier, it's a relational activity. So ideally, we can even quiet with other people. When I first started to help people learn the skill with the ministry, when Thrive first began, so I would sit there and set a timer and I would say, let's get comfortable. Everybody get comfortable with the group. I would set a timer for like 15 seconds. And I would say, okay, what I want you to do is just focus on taking deep breaths with your abdomen, take those nice deep breaths. And I'm going to set a timer for 15 seconds. And we're just going to try being still and talk about it. And for some people, that 15 seconds was like torturous. They're like, that was awful. I don't want to ever do that again. They were just like, whoa. And other people were like, oh, that was actually really refreshing. So having other people can actually be helpful in some cases where I have others who are good at resting, they can quiet. The goal is to try to get your body and your mind calm so that you can be still and have some peace. And some people going out for a little walk in nature can help so that they can better access their quieting and their calming. So sometimes it's things that have to be removed to help me get there. In some cases, it's just I need more practice to get there and to stay there. And it's very common what happens for people who don't quite have the skill fully. They'll try to rest and their mind starts racing with their to-do list. And so that's part of what you have to work with when you're first starting. Some people just have to write their thoughts out on a piece of scratch paper and then go back to trying to rest. You got to put your phone away. Like your phone, we know the phone does so many things that really is opposed to quieting. So just give yourself breaks from the phone for a while so you can really focus on leaning into the rest and the quiet. So I often tell people your body has to quiet. Mm-hmm. Your mind and your brain also have to quiet. And that includes like my attention, my thoughts, my feelings. So we're trying to find the ingredients that better help you be able to quiet. So I have one son. It's hard for him to quiet in general, but if he laughs and giggles of something's funny, then afterwards he can better quiet. If I tried that with another son, that would backfire completely. It would just annoy him. So you learn what helps people to be able to better quiet, calm, be still, and just notice how it feels. And that's kind of the goal, Christy, as people practice. I always say, if I were in your shoes right now, what would I be thinking or feeling as I practice that? So we get people to start paying attention. The body is a canvas for your brain. So you start paying attention to what's happening. And we hope that more Christians will start learning this material. There's other faiths, other religions that are actually really good at this particular skill, but I believe this is something Jesus regularly practiced and the disciples would have practiced, and it's woven into the faith in many different ways in the Bible. So our hope is that this will be a skill that's restored for our families and our communities.
Yeah. So I hear a couple key things there as you're talking. Number one, quieting it, it's going to involve some troubleshooting, like figuring out what works for me, because what works for me may not be what works for you or this person or this person. Take some intention, setting aside some time, being willing to practice and develop it, because it may not come naturally. Might be a little tricky, and we're going to talk a little bit about that in a minute, especially if it's very, very hard for you. But you also hit on something, I think, with your son, even the laughing bit. But at Thrive, we talk about energy response styles, and how some of us are high energy responders, some low energy responders. So we don't have time to really dive into this very deeply, but could you share, just scratch the surface on these two different types of people and how that can impact how quieting works for them?
Yeah, that's a great. I'm glad you raised that point, because some of us are high energy responders and some of us are low energy responders. I'm a low energy responder. So all I need is a window, a cup of coffee, and the Bible, and I can sit for hours and rest and just enjoy some low energy time. I have a friend who she needs to go like for a 5-mile run before she could sit there and practice the quieting. So the high energy responders usually need to burn off some energy. They need to go move. They need to go for a brisk walk, and they just need to do something in order to then access the quieting place. Otherwise, the low energy responders, we usually can just kind of easily gravitate toward that solution. But what I find is if you're a high energy responder and your friend's a low energy responder, your friend's probably saying, all you got to do is be still and watch the birds out the window and try to relax. And you might think that's just not going to work. There's no way that's going to work, because some of us are high energy responders. We need some movement and activity to be able to better quiet, but some of us are already low energy. The goal is you kind of need, your nervous system does both. So you're going to do both at different times throughout your day, but it helps to recognize those patterns. Do you prefer movement or activity before you rest, or are you comfortable just being able to go and rest? And we see this with music. Some of us like really the kind of music that just kind of gets the adrenaline running and gets us moving, and that's comforting. That would be a high energy responder. The low energy responders, we usually like the low energy rest and sounds. It's just, they're kind of soothing and comforting. So just recognizing we have those differences. There's not one right way or one wrong way. Just finding what works, what best helps you access low energy rest.
Perfect. Thanks, Chris. I think that can be really helpful. So if people are out there and they're like, yeah, it's not easy for me to rest and to do some quieting, that you can try some of these things, like Chris said, going out for a run or doing something high energy, and then seeing, does that help? And again, that's part of the troubleshooting or the trial and error of figuring out what works for you. So going back to, Chris, this idea of healing, one of the things you've mentioned, and you touched on this a little bit earlier, is that you've said a byproduct of trauma can be that I lose my ability to quiet. When we quiet, then some of the things come up to the surface that we've been avoiding. And so some people might find that they start to quiet and panic. The panic button is like, wah! And so it can be very uncomfortable, very scary, very unsettling to start to quiet. And so if someone's finding themselves getting triggered, or they're finding things flow to the surface that they don't feel like they have the capacity to deal with, what are steps that they can take to get moving in the quieting arena?
I'm so glad that we're talking about this, because this is a big one. So your brain's survival circuit, we call it level 2 of the 5 levels in the life model, but the survival circuit, when it's hyper aroused, and it's usually because I've had a strong fear reaction from something, what happens is this part of the brain also almost goes into a cramp, and it's really hard to change it. And when that happens, it's often, we see this with post-traumatic stress, people lose their ability to quiet. They just can't quiet because, Christy, what you just said is, when I start to quiet what we'd call implicit memory, which is like residue from my unresolved pain, that starts to come up, and I start noticing it. And the way that I notice is I don't like how I feel. So whenever I rest, I have an aversion to quieting because I don't like how I feel. In the sense that your brain is saying, hey, you know what? I'm glad you're stopping right now, because I've got something here I would like us to work through. And you're like, I don't want to deal with that. So the good news is you can obviously get healing on the things that might need healing. And we can also learn to override that survival circuit when it starts having strong opinions. It just takes a little bit of practice. This is where it helps to have a high capacity mind with us. So this is someone that's really good at quieting, and they're especially good at quieting when big feelings start to come up. So if I'm with someone, I will have actually draw attention to they're not alone here, because what happens is part of what makes trauma is I feel alone in it. So as soon as I start quieting, my brain, it starts to feel alone. We call that attachment pain. The brain does not like attachment pain. So we want to actually practice with people when this is happening and say, hey, let's try this in really small steps. And we're going to just try different activities to try to quiet. But I want you to notice that there's people around you. You're not alone here. And so that combination of practicing with people so that I'm not alone, and practicing in really small steps can go a long way. And again, your brain is telling a story. And so if this is happening when you or friends try to quiet, it's a breadcrumb trail. There's a really good reason for it, right? So let's just acknowledge it's not that you're broken. It's just your brain's telling you a story. There's something that needs to be addressed. There's probably a splinter that might need to be removed. Let's grow some capacity. That's where the role of community is really helpful. We can build capacity. We practice in small steps. And I always ask people to notice, how does it feel when you just tried quieting for 30 seconds? Even if they say it was awful, it was miserable, with a little bit of practice, I don't force it. Like, we're not going to try 20 minutes, just small steps, noticing how it feels will go a long way. And the brain can actually start developing positive associations with rest. And that tends to be what happens as people will start to practice this. I'll hear them say, well, when I first started doing this, I hated it. But actually now I start craving it if I don't take time to quiet in an afternoon or in my day. So the brain will actually, when I start getting what I need, my brain says, oh, this is good. And I'll start craving it. And that's actually a good sign when you notice that you're wanting some quiet, you're wanting some rest, you're missing rest, you're thinking about rest. Those are all signs that something is shifting in you. And that's a good thing. Then we just need some practice. We just practice a little bit at a time, and that will really go a long way.
That's great. So you've already summarized it pretty well, but just to re-summarize, so finding someone who's good at quieting to help us quiet so we can do it with someone. We don't feel alone. We have a model, bite-sized, being able to start small and build. And again, troubleshooting along the way, being an observer of, wow, okay, that didn't respond too well to that, or that one was not so bad, and just kind of observing how we respond and what things work better than others, and just being patient in the process of learning is really good. I was thinking about how, I like to do breathing exercises to help quiet, but I know sometimes when I'm feeling really stressed out, or especially when I first started and I wasn't familiar with it, I would almost start to panic when I would do breathing exercises. And I would feel like my chest tighten up, and it felt so uncomfortable. And so it took a lot of practice to push through it. And now breathing exercises is one of my go-tos for calming. I really love it. But if I'm in a high stress time, I have to work through it a little bit more to have it be calming and relaxing and stuff like that. So we are all growing and learning, and there is so much grace in that process.
Yes, there is. And I like to tell people that deep breathing is part of what activates that parasympathetic nervous branch of your nervous system. So that's deep breathing activates the brakes, which can slow things down. So just noticing our breathing, to be honest, is huge. I'm glad you shared that, Christy, because just noticing our breathing, don't breathe from up here, try to breathe from your abdomen. Daniel Siegel, great brain theoretician, he actually has people lay on the ground with a book on their belly just to help them breathe from their abdomen so that they can get more oxygen into their lungs, which means more oxygen to your brain. So it's the practice, and then telling stories about it, telling stories about rest, your favorite times of resting, how it felt. So if I have friends that are just starting on this journey, I will sometimes just share some really good stories about times where I rested and how that felt and what it was like. And so just, small steps, practice stories, breathing, all of these things. And I know you're about to talk about resources soon, but I'm excited about some of those resources because people ultimately just need some practice.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, perfect segue. We do want to share a couple of key resources for you regarding skill 2, quieting, and how it can help you in your healing journey. So we're really excited because we are doing our first ever skill practice class. Now, this is going to, if you've done our online practice communities, this is a little similar to that, but it's shorter. We're going to meet for an hour and a half on February 5th, and Chris is going to lead us specifically through practicing skill 2. So he'll do a tiny bit of teaching, but the focus of this is practice. So he'll lead us through a short series of exercises, and then we'll be able to discuss and practice them in breakout rooms. And so this is $19 for early registration. And let's see if there's any, and a cool bonus for everybody who signs up for this practice class is that we're going to be giving you a 50% off coupon for any of our Skill 2 online courses. And the online courses are going to provide a pathway for you to continue your practice at your own pace with Chris as your coach. And so I do want to mention that our February 5th practice class, this class is live. We are not recording it. So this is just for people who can come live. This will give a jump start to your practice, and then you can continue your practice through online courses. And so as far as finding online courses, you can go to thrivetoday.org/skill2. And this has all of our Skill 2 resources. So we have some free webinars. We have a theory course if you want to learn more about the theory behind Skill 2. And there's also links to the online courses that I believe should be up today, if not early next week. So lots of resources for you to continue learning more about Skill 2. And then there are probably a lot of you out there. We have a lot of people in our audience who are coaches, counselors, ministers, or people who even just volunteer pastorally. If you're someone who helps other people walk through the hard stuff in life, we invite you to be a part of our counseling audience. And we are just continuing to try to put out resources for counselors so that you can help other people in their journey. And so if that is you, you can go to this bit.ly link and join our counseling audience and stay updated. And I want to mention that we're actually going to do a special at the end of our Skill 2 practice class on February 5th. We're going to do a special 15-minute Q&A at the end of that, specifically for counselors, coaches, and ministers who want to ask questions on how to implement these exercises into their practice or their ministries. Let's see. And if you missed it, again, this is part 2 of our Unlock Your Healing. So you can go to YouTube and see our part 1 at bit.ly/Unlock Healing part 1. So Chris, anything you want to add on to that?
Yeah, it's a lot of good information. It's really helpful. More than anything, I hope friends will enjoy just having the language. For a lot of us, this just validates our reality. Like I said earlier, you're not broken. Just your brain has to learn a skill. And when we've had splinters from our life experience for whatever reasons, those things really do affect us. And one of the ways they will affect us more than anything is in our ability to be calm, our ability to regulate what we feel, our ability to be quiet and rest. So it's helpful to understand these things, that we can change it. We are not locked on to these unhelpful patterns for the rest of our lives. It's just sometimes new neural pathways just need to be built. Highways need to be built with some good practice. So I hope that everyone hears that today.
Yeah, I love that you brought that up, because that really is one of our key messages is hope. That there is hope. There are things that we can all do to see things shift and change in our lives. So thank you for driving home that point, Chris. So if you are joining us on Facebook Live, we are going to stop the streaming here. We're going to be doing Q&A on Zoom, and there's a link on Facebook if you want to register and join us on Zoom. And so for the rest of you on Zoom, we're going to start our Q&A in just a second. So I'm going to stop our live stream. Facebook people, thank you for joining us. All righty. So for those of you on Zoom, we're going to have you guys put in questions. We have a few that have already come in, and we will take the ones that we have time for. So Chris, let's see. Oh, okay. Someone asked about the link for counselors. I put that in the chat. If you scroll up, it should be there, and you're also going to receive an email with the link to it. So here's a question. Is it possible for high energy responders to be masking a trauma response?
Great question, and yes. And so if you're a high energy responder and you suspect that there could be added energy behind some of those patterns, definitely. One of the common things I have people do, first we just learn to get comfortable reflecting on God's gifts, and then thinking about times where we felt God's peace. And so when people are able to sense, feel, enjoy God's peace, then I would often, if they have that connection with Jesus, then I would often have them talk to Jesus about what these feelings remind them of, or where they felt this before. And again, this is a Jesus question. And probably about 8 out of 10 times, Jesus will often bring up something that's playing out. So it's a breadcrumb trail. And then those are opportunities to get God's peace in some of those places where your brain might not have God's peace. So you do it under the right conditions. I just wouldn't do that cold or blindly. We don't want to just activate pain files for the fun of it. We get connected with Jesus, and then we talk to him about what that's all about. So with the high energy responders, it's often harder to recognize because your propensity is already going to be to do the high energy stuff. But what you'll notice, there's this extra fuel. Often fear is that fuel that just says, but you know what, there's something over the top here. Because like even high energy responders with the skill can still shift gears and enter that low energy quieting state. So if it's hard to do that, it could be because I need the skill. Or it could be because there's that what we call implicit memory, which is just the feelings associated with some of that pain are sneaking into the present. And that's what robs us and makes it harder to learn the skill. So if you're practicing the skill and it doesn't feel like it's holding up over the test of time, then it's quite possible there's a rock in your shoe that needs to be removed so you can better run that race. And so it's helpful to understand that. That's a really good question.
Yeah. Thank you, Chris. That's really good. And I apologize. I put some links, but I didn't put it in the chat for everyone. So you will get an email with all the links, but I have the link for the counselors because several people have been asking for that. So that is now in the chat for everyone to see. Chris, what about if someone doesn't have, so we went through like quieting with someone else. What if someone doesn't have someone to do that with? What would you suggest for them?
That's a good question as well. So there's a couple things I would do. One of them is I would start making lists of the good stuff. So one of the ways you grow your emotional capacity is by opening joy files. So thinking about highlights from your day, highlights from your week, joy moments, as well as just gratitude, what you're thankful for. So starting those kinds of lists actually is a really good place to begin. And then looking for, possibilities in the community where maybe someone would start a group. There's lots of good resources that you could start, like a relational skill group to practice these exercises. But in the meantime, set timers, start a journal, thinking about reflecting on the good stuff, practice quieting, noticing what happens when you quiet. When you can start interacting with other people, you'll get more miles down the road. You'll get better mileage and you'll get farther down the road. But in the meantime, just start working with what you have available today. And that will go a long way right there. And you can build on that over time.
Awesome. Thank you, Chris. How often do you need to practice the quieting during the day?
You know what I often encourage people to do, and there's various apps that also help with this, but you can find little moments. Quieting doesn't have to be super long. So even on little breaks, even if you're taking a 30-second window to quiet, to be still, to breathe, to just notice what happens when you try to rest. I would do it. You can't overdo it. Let's put it that way. You cannot overdo it. And if you're recognizing you really need this, as much as you can do it in small increments, I would suggest that. Again, maybe just little breaks. Some people will just set a little timer every 3 hours. They will, timer goes off and they just take a few minutes to just catch their breath and practice quieting. So you cannot overdo it. Just try to find a schedule that works for you. But I find people who do this kind of a little bit throughout the day, that goes a long way, because you're internalizing the skill. So as you have to kind of purposefully practice in the beginning, which can feel a little monotonous, but over time, this becomes internalized as a habit, and you will start doing it reflexively without thinking about it. That's what we're after.
Awesome. And would that be better, Chris? I think sometimes that we can have really big, ambitious goals that aren't really attainable. So if someone's trying to get this developed as a habit, is it better to do small bite size that they can actually maintain to get it moving?
Yes, that's a good distinction. Definitely. I would suggest small bites. Like when I started working with the group with lots of trauma in the group, like really, it was like 5, 10, 15 seconds. Like that's how long we started. And we just slowly over time increased that. But we started just small steps. So start out where you feel comfortable, then kind of try to grow from there. And just pay attention to your responses. Your responses are always telling a story, whether you're getting distracted, thinking about your to-do list, you're worrying, becoming anxious, whatever it is, just notice what happens. So the goal is not just to do it perfectly. The goal is to practice while you notice what happens when you try to practice. That's what we're after.
That's a really good distinction. Yeah. And it maybe feels a little bit more attainable. Like I don't have to do it just right.
That's right. Exactly. Take some pressure off.
Yeah, exactly. So Chris, someone said, I recently discovered Psalm 131. This was huge for me, but I suspect there's more to practicing this than I'm even picking up on the surface. Can you speak to this?
Yeah, I mean, the Psalms are wonderful for quieting. I think I just love the Psalms for that. So I would encourage you, as you start practicing reading Psalms, reading those areas in the scripture that are comforting and soothing. But I would add a little twist, a fun twist of just starting to ask Jesus, what is on his mind for you as you read that Psalm? What would he like you to know? In pastoral sessions, when I'm praying with people, I'll often have them ask Jesus, what is Jesus doing as you try to rest? What would he like you to know as you sit here and try to rest? So what that's doing is it's a couple different skills, but it's a good skill to notice, one, I'm not alone, which your brain likes, I'm not alone. And then what is Jesus doing as I sit here? And I find Jesus is actually really good at resting with people. 25 years, I have watched people enjoy rest with Jesus, and I'm never tired of that. Like Jesus welcomes rest. And so just practicing interacting with Jesus as you enjoy those Psalms is a fun exercise. You can do a lot of fun things with that practice. So just noticing, it's that relational piece we're going to add into the quieting and the reading of the Psalms.
Great. Yeah, that's really good. I love doing that too. It's actually pretty fun.
It is. It really is.
So I have two related questions, Chris. So both of these people are mentioning when they quiet and trauma comes up. And so we talked about this a little bit. So one question is, should I just keep trying, or is there another interim step? And another person is asking, how can I find validation for that pain and still try to override it? So anything you can speak to about that trauma that's popping up?
Those are both really good questions. So what I would recommend, if I'm trying to rest and quiet, a trauma's coming up, that's the sign your brain's telling you a story. I would start spending time on the appreciation and the gratitude. Let's recharge the battery there, because what you want your brain to be able to do is to recognize a feeling's there, but be able to notice whatever good is going on over here. So, and that only happens with practice. So I would start practicing, noticing the good stuff and reflecting on the good stuff. And what do you notice? What does it feel like in your body and your mind, your thoughts and so forth. When you practice the gratitude and the appreciation, I definitely wouldn't try forcing it. Don't try to force that. That would also be a good opportunity if you have someone you trust to pray with you. So when you're trying to rest, they can rest with you. When those feelings come up, that you'd have someone who can pray with you and talk to Jesus about what you need right there. That's a really good, in my mind, like you're primed for that interaction when that's happening. If you have someone that you trust who could just pray with you. So I would often quiet with people when that comes up, invite Jesus into that. What do you need right now? And there's times Jesus will say, yep, it's there, but let's just rest. But we recognize it's right there. And there's other times Jesus will say, okay, there's something here I want you to know. And there's a place where I want to show you where I am, whatever it is. He knows what you need because he understands your capacity so much better than anyone else. So I would just practice some of those things: appreciation, gratitude, highlights from the day, what was satisfying from your day or not satisfying. And then keep, small steps of quieting, and ideally having someone who could pray with you would be really helpful to see if you could get some peace, because your brain is telling you a story there, and we want to pay attention to that.
Mm-hmm. No, that's good. Thank you, Chris. So let's look at the flip side, because you've talked about looking for someone to quiet with you. Now, what would it look like for you to come alongside someone else who's trying to quiet?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. So what I would do is I would find out, if I'm trying to help you rest, I would say, what kinds of things help you rest? And you might say, you know what, if I go for a walk around the block and then I come home and rest, I say, okay, let's go for a walk around the block. On the walk around the block, I would help notice, what do you notice in the environment on this walk? Like you hear the birds singing over there by that house. And so during the walk, I would be trying to have you tell me things that you notice on the walk. What do you notice in your body? How's your breathing? What do you notice in the neighborhood and the sights, the sound? How does it feel with the wind on your face? So just all those little things can go a long way. And then when you get back to the house, it's okay, what chair do you like to sit in when you're trying to rest? Like that recliner? Okay, get in that recliner. Is there any music that's helpful? Anything and again, music, if it's helpful. If it's not helpful, you don't need it, then that's fine. But if it's helpful, that can be useful. Okay, what kinds of music? Fernando Ortega? Okay, let's put Fernando Ortega on. And so helping you then say, okay, now we're going to set a timer. Let's say 60 seconds. We'll set a timer for 60 seconds. We'll practice. I'll sit over here on the couch. You're sitting over there. We'll practice. After 60 seconds, I'll say, okay, talk to me. What did you notice? What happened? And I would ask questions to help bring your attention to those things. So like your body, what did it feel like? How was your breathing? What were you thinking? And if it felt like you had the capacity for it, then we might even talk to Jesus about some of those things. Say, okay, well, Jesus, what were you doing during that? What should we know about that? And what about when this fear came up? That seems important. What do you want us to know today about that? So notice I'm not pushing for pain. The last thing I want to do is push for pain. So we're just trying to focus on the good stuff, because if pain's there, it will come up. We don't have to go searching for it. And getting connected with Jesus and learning to quiet. And that's the part that feelings come up. I have to learn to quiet. That helps me be able to calm those feelings. It helps me to manage those feelings. Even will help me learn to return to joy from those feelings. So just very practical practice, noticing the good stuff, reflecting on it, and then reviewing it. All of that is good. And at the end, then I would just say, so when you look back on that, what have you learned? All of that is teaching this frontal lobe in your brain to be able to, one, have a good experience, but also have the language and have something on file. Because when you do this, this is the part of your brain that pays attention to your body. So when I need the quieting, this is the alert system that says, hey, I'm getting tense. I'm holding my breath. I'm getting worried. I think I need to practice quieting. That's what you're training when you do all of that. It's really valuable, and a little bit will go a long way, and you'll start doing it on your own, and you won't need you won't need that help or that guidance. You'll be able to do that, you and Jesus.
Mm-hmm. And so if you're not in person with the person, another way is to even talk about, like, tell me about a time you felt really peaceful, and like, take me on a trip with you, or a vacation you had that was wonderful. Paint a picture for me. Like, what are you observing and seeing and hearing, so they can do the same thing with something that's happened or something from their day, right, as you're discussing on the phone or online or whatever.
Great suggestion, Christy. When I was pastoring, I would have different congregants would go, I would help them. So every time I would see them, I'd say, hey, did you rest today? What was it like? So every time they got to connect with me, they knew at some point in the conversation, I was going to ask them how it's going. And what it did was they would expect it. So they'd start doing it and they would start practicing it because they knew I was going to ask. And even though I'm not there practicing with them, I'm just checking in with them and, hey, what was it like? So Christy, that's, I think, a wonderful idea. Just being able to interact, tell those stories and see what you notice. And there's no waste of opportunity there. Even if you try to practice and it doesn't go well and you feel like it went south, you know what? You're still doing good stuff by trying and practicing it. So your brain grows every time you try. And that's what we're after.
Awesome. So we have several more questions. We probably only can get to one or two. But if we can this one, I think is just probably a quick answer. I'm a low energy responder. Normally I'm having trouble quieting though. Could this be because I'm in fight, flight, or freeze mode, or have been in that mode for a long time?
Definitely could be. If you're a low energy responder, it's commonly it's hard because there's something blocking or hindering that needs addressed, or I just need more practice. So if you're practicing and it still for some reason seems like you have a blockage or it's just hard, there might be something there. Unprocessed pain does hinder our ability to quiet. It does. That's what it does. And that's very frustrating on the one hand, but on the other hand, I think it's almost a blessing because I discover there's some rocks in my shoe that do need to be dealt with that's hindering it. So it's kind of a mixed bag there, but I would troubleshoot it with the low energy responders. What happens if you start practicing consistently? And again, I would help you be able to identify whether this is unprocessed pain by I'm looking for the signature of fear that might be in there. I'm looking for whether you can get in touch with your body and notice your breathing and how that feels, and just kind of shining the light on whatever happens when you try to rest. Like that to me is the goal. That's where we learn a lot for what the needs are. Like what happens when you try to rest? Whether it's resistance or distracted, whatever it is, that's the time where you can learn a lot about what's going on and interpret it over time as you start practicing.
Awesome. Well, we have more questions than we can get to, unfortunately, but please, if you really feel like I need an answer to this or could really use some help, you can you can email us at info@thrivetoday.org and send your question, and we will do our best. We can't guarantee it, but we will do our best to get a response to you. And we would just want to say thank you so much for being with us to talk about the skill of quieting, to talk about how this really is so essential and key in our healing journeys. And we hope that you will join us for our Skill to Practice class. This is going to be a fabulous way to, again, just jumpstart your skill practice, to get you going in it, and to do that in community, especially if you're someone who doesn't have a lot of people to practice with. This is providing an opportunity for you to do that with other people. So thank you for being with us, Chris. Thank you so much for sharing all your insight and just being with us today.
Thank you, Christy, for leading us. So appreciate you. And friends, you're the heroes. You're the ones on the ground doing this stuff. So we're very proud of you for even walking on this road, and may God just richly bless this process for you of enjoying his peace.
Yeah. Well, thanks again for being with us. We look forward to seeing you at another event or webinar, and we just pray that you have a wonderful day. Bye-bye.